Hello and welcome to Politics at Jack and Sam's Daily, the podcast that seeks to tell you, first thing, every morning, everything that's coming up in the day ahead in British politics in under 20 minutes.
Good morning. It is Wednesday the 25th of September. My name is Jack Blanchard of Politico. With me, as always, is Sam Coates of Sky News, and we are still both at the Labour Party conference in Liverpool for our sins, where we have been all week. But it feels, Sam, like the attention is very quickly moving away from here and out onto the world stage this morning.
That's right. I think the whole globe's attention is switching. Well, maybe they weren't focused on Liverpool, but they are definitely now switching attention to Lebanon. The Prime Minister has, in the last few hours, landed in New York, with a major warning that the Middle East is on the brink of war. Meanwhile, 600 British troops are being sent to the region to prepare for the possibility of a mass evacuation of Lebanon, which officials fear could be pretty imminent. With that now the backdrop to everything that we're talking about, how are we dividing up today?
Yeah, we'll talk about that first, Sam. Keir Starmer is in New York at the United Nations now, and given what's happening in Lebanon, we'll need to talk a bit about that first. Before we move back here to wash up what's happening in Liverpool, Keir Starmer has been doing interviews here before he left, talking about domestic issues as well as war in the Middle East, and the reviews are in of his big speech yesterday. We'll be talking about that as well, and we'll give you a quick rundown of what's coming up at Labour conference today, the last day of the conference, when their focus will be very much on public services and the terrible state they are in. But let's kick off with the pretty bleak situation in the Middle East. This is the crisis that the Foreign Office has been fearing, Sam, for the past year, that this war would escalate beyond the conflict in Gaza. It appears now to be doing so in quite a serious way. Keir Starmer was asked about this last night as he was leaving Liverpool. What did he say, Sam? What did he tell reporters?
Before he left and on the plane, Keir Starmer has been telling everybody to pull back from the brink. Now, Keir Starmer is saying that pretty openly, as are most Western leaders. I think that there is a script for kind of NATO allies as they descend on New York, all of them being very open about the scale of the threat posed by the Middle East to peace, and calling for a ceasefire and for de-escalation. I have to say, if you've watched events over the last few days, the brinkmanship looks pretty terrifying, and there are ominous noises on both sides as Israel and Lebanon, and in Lebanon, where Hezbollah are responding to attacks by the Israelis. It seems like there is a spiral that is only destined to go one way.
And this is now completely overshadowing Keir Starmer's, or dominating Keir Starmer's trip to New York. He's there until Friday. He was supposed to be there, or he is there, for the United Nations General Assembly. That happens every year at this time of year. World leaders gather, and the expectation was that the focus of this trip was twofold. One, they want to talk more about Ukraine and this issue that we were discussing a week or so ago about whether Ukraine should be allowed to use long-range missiles firing into Russia or not. And Keir Starmer's team were hoping, and I think still are hoping vaguely, that they might be able to secure meetings with Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, the two contenders to be the next US president, while they were there. All of that will still happen, but clearly the situation in the Middle East is overshadowing that. It's just another sign, Sam. I mean, if Keir Starmer needed any reminder of how events can just completely overtake you as a Prime Minister, I mean, it's crazy, isn't it? He was here in Liverpool yesterday giving this big, important speech. We'd all been hyping up how important it is. Then he's dashing around answering questions about his suits and his chief of staff and all that sort of stuff. And then, he gets on a plane and suddenly his brain goes into war mode and he's thinking about a crisis in the Middle East as well as a crisis in Ukraine. It's not the easiest job being Prime Minister, is it?
No, and it's important to just highlight what the British focus is here. Yes, we are a cog in the global diplomatic jigsaw trying to de-escalate this conflict. It's probably important not to overstate the role of Britain, but I think we're, as we often do, standing shoulder to shoulder with America. But there's another more domestic focused or British focused test, which is this potential for a very, very complicated, sudden mass evacuation of British citizens from Lebanon, which could be coming down the track. Now, yesterday, John Healey, the Defence Secretary, left Liverpool, left the Labour Party conference early to go and chair a Cobra on this issue. You've got a situation in Lebanon that appears to be close to all-out war. That's what defence sources are telling people this morning. And although they don't think they're going to have to press the button on a mass evacuation of British citizens super imminently, they know that the situation could change quite quickly. And at that point, it is very, very important that for the government not to look like it was caught out. Right now, as Keir Starmer said on the plane to travelling journalists, everybody who's a British citizen should use the commercial flights to get out of the country. But as we know from Afghanistan, as we know from other war zones, there is always a residual rump who do not. And how the UK extracts people at that point, if commercial, because if Israel do conduct any kind of bombing campaign, they will go for the airport first, just as they have done in the past. How does Britain get its citizens out? And Britain has too often in the past been slower than other Western countries to get all of its citizens out and done a less successful job. And that is not something that Keir Starmer will want to see happen. So the behind-the-scenes focus, I think, of government is going to be on how that evacuation might work.
Yeah, and there's a UN Security Council meeting happening in New York this afternoon, which Keir Starmer may indeed end up addressing, although we don't know that for sure yet. He'll definitely be addressing the UN General Assembly tomorrow, Thursday, where he'll be making a more of a sort of two steps back speech about poverty and how tackling poverty and war and climate change is in Britain and the West interests. And then he flies back on Friday and straight back into the domestic strife that he was been talking about here in Liverpool. So, yeah, it's a busy old calendar. Should we talk a bit about the domestic stuff? I mean, he's been giving these interviews overnight, Sam, being asked whether, you know, these big global issues are overshadowing his domestic agenda. He insists he can do both. He insists he can deal with both at the same time. I mean, that is the job of a prime minister, but it's pretty stark to see him being asked in the first breath about what do we do about the fact the Middle East is on the brink of war. And then the next question is about some suits he was given for free and should he really be sitting in the Arsenal director's box. And it's, it just shows how the Labour government, I guess Downing Street's inability to squash some of these relatively small-scale domestic stories that have been bothering the Prime Minister for a week just continues to rumble on here, even in the midst of a big global conflict.
That's right. Well, right now on the plane over to New York, you could see, those who were on the plane could see Sue Gray with the Prime Minister reunited. Of course, his Chief of Staff didn't go to Labour conference, but she was sitting just, I think, 3 or 4 rows in front of the journalists on the plane over. Lots of people wanting the Downing Street political operation to have much more of a grip. So let's see if her physical presence near the Prime Minister achieves that. He had his big speech yesterday where he talked about reform, but we didn't actually hear a lot about what that meant. In the interviews we've had this morning, he started to talk that out. What the Prime Minister does, by the way, is he's doing one round of interviews this morning, which he conducted yesterday, and then the travelling pack with him will do another round of interviews at around lunchtime UK time that will be released at 5 o'clock. So we're getting a double dose of hits of Keir Starmer face-to-face with different broadcasters today. The message he has been wanting to get on some of the broadcast interviews this morning is he does have one reform plan that he wants to talk about and Liz Kendall will talk about, and that is forcing the long-term sick to always look for work. He appeared to suggest that if you are on the long-term sickness benefit, then you are going to have to show that you are looking for employment. The bill for sickness benefit is going to go up 30 billion in just a few years, and so it's unsurprising that a government of any stripe would have to do something like this. But for the Labour Party, disability benefit has always been a running sore right back to when Harriet Harman was in charge of that brief and Tony Blair was Prime Minister.
Yeah, it's interesting talking to cabinet ministers at the conference here. You know, lots of them are obviously very excited to be in government after all these years in opposition, as you'd expect. They've been in their jobs a couple of months now. They feel like lots of them feel like they've got a plan for their department. They feel like they've got a good story to tell about how they're going to change the country excitedly and how they can help feed into the government's broader plans for growth and these missions that Keir Starmer likes to talk about. But you also get a real sense of frustration that not very much of that is coming across at the moment. And I've had that from several cabinet ministers privately over a drink, over a cup of coffee, saying that, you know, we've got a great story to tell here and they just don't feel it's really being told very well or very effectively. Some of the policies that they're planning to deliver or are starting to deliver those messages they don't feel are coming out, and instead we've had whatever it is now 10 days of discussion about free suits and frocks and glasses and donations and backbiting in Downing Street, and it is definitely frustrating a lot of people here. And I was saying to one, well, isn't it, it's down to the Prime Minister to get a grip of this, isn't it? And they said, no, the Prime Minister's got an awful lot to do. There's war on and so on. The Prime Minister has people in place whose job it is to do that. And the very pointed suggestion was that some of those senior people in Downing Street are very much not doing that effectively at the moment. And I just do wonder how much longer this can carry on for if, your senior members of your cabinet are feeling like that. Just think Keir Starmer, it doesn't seem to have a very clear grip on his operation, and that cannot continue for very much longer.
No, that echoes the conversations that I have as well. I think in the first instance, the solution to this will be sorting out who is going to be the cabinet secretary, the most important civil servant, who is going to be the chief civil servant in Keir Starmer's office. There's been a vacancy and a kind of vacuum there. And then rather than sacking people, most people I've been talking to think that they might just bring in more politically minded people alongside the Sue Greys and the Morgan McSweeneys, because I think the worry is that the Downing Street operation is underpowered. What's interesting about this conference is that you are getting more of a sense of the political direction of Keir Starmer himself. One of the criticisms is that they don't have a story to tell. Well, I thought in the leader speech, in Keir Starmer's speech yesterday, actually we got a bit more of a sketch of what drives him in politics than you usually do. If you were to read biographies, the Tom Baldwin book about Keir Starmer, what comes across is that actually Keir Starmer is quite a social justice warrior. He thinks of himself as quite moral, but he thinks campaigning to battle social injustice, quite a key theme of his that threads through his life. But during the election campaign, that it really didn't talk very much about that. I think in part because a lot of issues connected to social justice cost money to rectify. Closing the gap between rich and poor and justice and injustice just as expensive business. They didn't talk about it. But yesterday, in that speech, suddenly justice and social justice was threaded through it, whether it was his promise to help people from Grenfell, whether it was to help those who lost, those who are homeless, who are in the military. He I think is leaning into the real Keir Starmer. We got much more of a flavour of that than they kept from us in the campaign. I heard an anecdote about Keir Starmer before the leadership contest that he won. A group of Labour MPs, his friends, sat him down and went, "Look, Keir," they were sitting in a circle, they put him in the middle, went, "Look, Keir, we need to understand what drives you in politics." And he talked through a number of things. He just kept going, "No, that's not good enough. We want to understand your mission." And he would give another answer. "No, that's not good enough." And then finally he just went, "Justice. That's why I became a human rights lawyer. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing." They're like, that is the thing that defines you. In the period that he's been opposition leader and the period that he's been Prime Minister to date, we haven't heard a lot about that, but that story is now starting to be told.
Yeah, I thought the best bits of his speech were when he was clearly fired up and feeling passionate about justice, when he was talking about the victims of different injustices down the years that he wants to address, when he was talking about his own family and how he felt injustice that they had sometimes faced. Those flashes of passion definitely work for Keir Starmer from a political point of view. He doesn't always seem super authentic, although I think people who know him say he is like a genuine guy. He's not like a scheming politician, and yet he sometimes comes across as a little bit aloof or a little bit detached because of the sort of guy he is. And when you see that nature of him coming through, as we did in parts of that speech yesterday, I think that's very effective for him, and probably would have edited down other parts of the speech. It felt like it went on a bit too long, but most people here at the conference feel like he did a pretty good job, and I think that's probably right. We started the week saying, wow, it's surprisingly gloomy here. It was pouring with rain. No one was very happy. I would say that the conference has finished now Wednesday with Labour in a more upbeat mood than they were. I think Rachel Reeves' speech and Keir Starmer's speech between them did a reasonable job of doing that. And certainly if you were at some of the parties last night, the mood was a lot more buoyant than it had been back on Sunday. And I think, they sort of feel like they've got through this okay, but it's clear that there are problems that still need to be addressed.
The moral mission, which was threaded through that speech, does jar with the stories about freebies and the like that we've had. It's a brilliant anecdote in the Times this morning. They claim a cabinet minister told them that the reason that Wahid Ali, the Labour donor, donated him some suits was because, well, as they put it, there was a period where Keir Starmer put on some weight, and Wahid Ali noticed that and said, well, you need some new suits, I'll help you out as a result. So, and actually there was a period in the last Parliament where, you could observe that phenomenon. So that's why all of that furor came up, according to one cabinet minister. He also talks in one of the interviews this morning about the actual situation. There's been a lot of confusion about what's going on with Arsenal and his season ticket. He has confirmed that he is paying his season ticket. So the football matches that he goes to aren't a complete freebie, but he is now a guest of Arsenal in the box, in the director's box. He has 2 seats there, I understand, which the club have given to him. Not the whole box, just those 2 seats. And that is something you can't pay for. You have to be just simply a guest of the club. And that's how he's going to argue that he can keep going to matches and the security can be satisfied, that his security will be protected. Whether or not he has to declare any kind of value for that additional kind of for effectively the additional luxury of sitting in the director's box, we'll have to see from his registered member of interest. That might come out as soon as Thursday.
Let's just talk a little bit about what's happening at Labour conference today, because we have a vote coming today on the winter fuel allowance cut, which is obviously the big totemic pledge made by Rachel Reeves early in her term as Chancellor, and which has proved very unpopular with lots and lots of people, including certain trade unions, in fact all the trade unions. They have forced a vote that is going to happen today. The Labour leadership managed to push it to the sort of end of conference after Keir Starmer's speech, in the hope that people wouldn't be paying too much attention by now, and I suspect that will be reasonably successful. But nevertheless, if you are here, that is going to happen, and the expectation is that the Labour leadership might well lose that vote, and therefore you will have the spectacle, albeit only a symbolic one, of the Labour conference sort of condemning the economic policy of the new Labour government, which is, it doesn't matter in terms of changing the position. The Downing Street are not going to change the position on this. It would look incredibly weak and not like they were able to follow through on anything. If they were to U-turn now on this cut, it's not going to happen. But it's still not a good look for them. And that is likely to happen today. What they want to talk about instead is the big speeches on the main stage. Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, Liz Kendall, as you said, the Work and Pension Secretary, will both be talking about the big reform in their departments. They are the 2 biggest public spending departments, and they both know that the huge pressure on their budgets means that they need to carry out significant reform, or there are many more cuts coming down the line.
Bridget Phillipson will talk about child-centred government, where children comes first. Not entirely clear what that means. Liz Kendall will defend winter fuel payments before that vote on the policy. There is a danger, though, with Keir Starmer not there. It all starts to get a little bit silly. It was getting a little bit silly after Keir Starmer left last night. I was talking to some advisors. They're all playing a game, Jack. The game is which one of their own is going to be fired or have to leave their job first. And they're all messaging each other with suggestions. And they're all comparing notes on who is the maddest junior minister to work with. I was giving some names. For legal safety, I'm not going to name the people that advisors say are the maddest junior ministers to work with. But you can see the danger of the adults having left. Some of the silliness kicking in. It is not a story that Chris Bryant, the arts minister, says films go on too long these days, because he's not going to mandate film companies to shorten their films. But ministers saying strange, unusual, and controversial stuff in the sidelines of this conference may be the thing that ends up grabbing attention today before they all sing the red flag and go home.
He's totally right, by the way. Films should be 90 minutes. This weird, like 3.5 hours. Like, get a decent editor. Seriously, just get a decent editor.
And Jack, podcast should be 20 minutes. And I think we might just be going over it, so we better shut up.
All right, we're headed back to London, where we will speak to you from tomorrow. Have a lovely day. Enjoy the last day of conference. Bye-bye.